Okay, hello everyone. Hope all of you are doing well. So this is a little different from our usual live classes. Um, we missed a couple of live classes last week due to various reasons. So I wanted to quickly catch up on our studies as much as possible. So I'm sharing a small recorded video with you in which we'll be looking at the next important topic in semantics, which is called theories of meaning. So in this video, basically we'll be looking at the three main theories of meaning. Their names are definitional theory, prototype theory, and exemplar theory. So all of these theories are put forward by linguists in order to understand how the concept of meaning, is conveyed through language, right? How does it, how do words encode meaning within them, and how are these things stored in our mind, right, as part of our linguistic knowledge? So basically, all these theories are theories. They are abstract in nature. We don't have experimental proof for many of these theories, and they have been put forward as possibilities rather than exact descriptions of how language works. So they have their own advantages as well as disadvantages, and you have to know uh, what are the main features of each theory, what are their advantages or disadvantages compared to the other theories, and how do they explain how language conveys meaning. Okay, so these are some of the things that we'll be discussing in this recorded video. Okay, so the first theory of meaning that we'll be discussing is called the definitional theory or the classical theory of concepts. So this theory of meaning is actually the simplest theory of meaning, and the basic idea is that uh, when we use language, every word that we hear or speak, right, every word in a language is associated with a certain concept in our mind. Okay, so that is the meaning of that word, right? So when we hear a certain word, for example, when I hear the word flower, right, so there are certain ideas, there are certain thoughts that are associated with this word which are immediately triggered in my mind. Okay, so this idea which is connected with this word is called the concept, right? And the theory goes on to tell us that there is a way of understanding this concept, right? This concept is just like a definition, right? For example, when we study technical terms, what do? We try to understand the meaning of a technical term by defining it in a certain way. So similarly, the concepts that are associated with the words in a language can also be defined in a certain way. So each word that is there in a language can be connected with a certain definition of the concept that it represents. Okay. So this is basically the idea of the definitional theory or the classical theory of concepts. Okay. So let's see this. Yeah. So every concept is associated with a definition, right? And all the lexemes that satisfy the definition is classified under that concept. So what does this mean? For example, we take an example of flower, right? A flower is a broad concept. So within that broad concept, you can have a rose, you can have a jasmine, you can have a lotus, you can have many different kinds of flowers. So whenever we, see a rose, we understand that this belongs to that category called flower, right? Or whenever we see a jasmine, then too we don't have any confusion. We still identify that as a flower. So even when the individual words change, they still belong to that concept called flower, right? So all the lexemes that satisfy a certain definition of this concept can be classified under that concept. So we need to find what that definition is. How do we define this concept so that everything that satisfies that definition can be put into that category, and everything that does not satisfy that definition is removed from that category, right? So all lexemes that satisfy the definition is classified under that particular concept, and all the lexemes that fail to satisfy the definition are excluded. Okay. So the easiest way to understand what these definitions are like is that they are just a list of features, right? A set of features. So the concept flower, the meaning called, the meaning of the word flower, it exists in our mind as a set of features, right? For example, we can have a feature like, it has a color, colorful. So that is a particular feature that we associate with flowers. Then we can have another feature. It contains honey, another feature. Then we can say it smells nice. It has a good smell. Yet another feature we can add. It has petals. So like this, for every concept we can define a set of features that that is usually possessed by that concept. So whenever we find something which satisfies all these features, we can classify that thing too as belonging to the the concept called flower. So that is how we can associate many different things with the same meaning. Okay. So when I have the concept of something like a man, right? We don't need to define every man that we see as a man, right? That concept of what a man is already something which is there in our mind. We know what the features of somebody who can be called a man is. So we basically just evaluate each person that comes before us, and whether if they satisfy all these features that are associated with the concept man, then we identify them as a man or men, right? If there are more than one. So that is basically how definitional theory works. We take each concept and we break it down into a set of features which is called its definition. If an object satisfies all those features, we understand that object as a part of this concept. If it doesn't, then we understand it as outside the concept. Okay. So for example, the concept boy, we can define the concept boy as young, male, human. So each of these things is a feature. Young is a feature, male is a feature, and human is a feature. Right? Only by satisfying all these three features can something be called a boy. Okay. So young, male, and human are individual components of the definition. These components are individually necessary. That is, each member of the concept must be young, male, and human. Okay. So we cannot have just a male human. That does not satisfy the concept boy, because it is not understood that it is young. So we need each member of this category to satisfy all three conditions: young, male, human. And these conditions are also called jointly sufficient. That means once something satisfies all these categories, all these definitions, then that thing can be put into that category. Okay. So any member who satisfies these three conditions, young, male, and human, can be called a boy. Okay. So this is how basically definitional theory tries to understand how meaning works. Each meaning, meaning is actually understood as a series of concepts in our mind, and each of these concepts is associated with a set of features which is called its definition. And whenever all the definitions are met by an object in real life, we associate that real life thing or that experience with this concept. Okay, so this is how definitional theory or the classical theory of concepts work. Okay, so this definitional theory, it actually has a number of problems or a number of drawbacks. Okay. The first drawback is that for many concepts, probably most of the concepts, it is very difficult to come up with satisfactory definitions. For example, let us have a concept of, let us say, anger. Okay, it is an emotion, right? We know what anger is, right? When somebody is angry, we know what the features are. They become very red in face. Maybe they shout, maybe they storm around the house, or maybe they act violently. Those are all things that we associate with the concept anger. But anger can also be in different ways, right? Maybe a person who is very angry might not say anything. They might not walk around, they might not break things, they might even just be completely silent. Okay. So it is very difficult to come up with a set of features which exactly define the concept anger, right? So maybe, let us take another concept, a concept like, say, independence or freedom, right? That is also something that we understand very well. When we know that, freedom is important, or independence is important, uh, and we have examples of the independence struggle through which our country became independent. But is individual independence the same as a country becoming independent? Can we define both of these ideas using the same definition? No. So for certain concepts, or for most concepts, it is very difficult to come up with these satisfactory definitions. Okay. Now, so that is the first drawback of definitional theory. It is very difficult to come up with definitions. Now, the second drawback is that it implies that categories have sharp boundaries. However, natural categories typically have fuzzy boundaries. Okay. For example, let us go back to the example of flower, right? We define flower as something which is colorful, something which has petals, something which has a nice smell, right? This is how we try to define a flower. But then there might be a flower which is not at all sweet smelling. You might have heard of certain flowers which are actually very foul smelling, right? Or there might be flowers without petals, right? Flowers like orchids, I don't think orchids have petals. They have just appearance of petals. They are not actual petals. Or sometimes a flower might not be colorful at all, right? They might be very extremely white, or they might even be the same color as the leaves. Okay. So natural categories like flowers, or animals, or things like that, we cannot exactly have uh, a finite number of things that exactly define it as a member of that category. Okay. They have sort of fuzzy boundaries. Another example which probably makes this clearer is, try to define what a bird is. Right? If we come up with a definition for a bird, like a bird is an animal which can fly, a bird is an animal which has feathers, or a bird is an animal which can sing beautifully, right? If these three are the three are the definitions that we come up with, the features of the definition that we come up with, then where do we include uh, a bird that cannot fly, like an ostrich, or a bird that cannot that does not have feathers, like the penguin, right? And a penguin is also a bird which cannot fly. So according to our definition, a penguin and an ostrich will not be a part of that category called bird. But we know that it is not true, right? So that is the second problem, right? This definitional theory imagines that all concepts have these extremely fixed boundaries. But in real experience, we know that these boundaries are very loose. They are very fuzzy. Okay. And the third drawback of definitional theory is that everything that satisfies a definition has equal status in a category. Okay. So that is what definitional theory puts forward. So according to definitional theory, an orchid, a lotus, a rose, a jasmine, some other flower, these are all equally flowers, right? But we know that certain flowers are more central to the category than other flowers. For example, when we immediately think of a flower, probably the first flower that comes into our mind is rose, right? It is not usually jasmine or marigold or uh, whatever, orchid or something. Usually it immediately our mind throws up this image of a rose. So this kind of a distinction between a rose as a more central example and other flowers as more peripheral examples is not really understood by definitional theory. According to definitional theory, if all the categories, if all the definitional features are met, then it is a member. If it is not met, it is not a member, right? All members of that concept are treated equally. But again, in real life, this is not what happens. So these are some of the drawbacks of the definitional theory.